And we're hot.
Hot mics, hot guys on hot mics. Welcome to Hot Guys on Hot Mics.
Hot guy number one, I'm Joe.
I'm hot guy number one, and I'm Adam.
So today we'll continue on with Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death. We are on Chapter 6, The Age of Show Business.
And the first chapter in part 2 of the book.
Correcto. So, I guess the main idea in the introduction of this chapter, Neil Postman kind of makes the distinction between television as a technology and television as a medium. And in the beginning, he kind of gives, albeit humorous examples about
says,
different sources that you could use a television.
Quixotic examples.
What did he said? You can use it as a bookshelf. You could use it as he had a student that used it as a light source. That was kind of funny.
A light source, a bookshelf.
He talked about technologies having their own agenda, which
their own biases that are inherent to the technology themselves.
Which I guess I suppose I mostly agree with that. And technology's agenda is entertainment, which is a big part of what he tried to argue for in this chapter.
You mean television?
Sorry, yeah.
Not technology, but maybe technology too. Well, I think it's interesting he draws the parallel between like television as a technology and television as a medium to the difference between like the brain and the mind, but I'm not sure which one's which. I think he says the brain is the physical thing and the mind is the technology, the medium of which that technology is used and
it's produced by,
what it is produced by that thing. So if we're differentiating just the technological and physical in some ways elements of television, moving into the philosophical or the rhetorical productions of it, and this book is largely focused on public discourse, which we'll get into, and so we're mostly interested in how the technology of television and then the medium of television has an impact in that space.
Yeah, pretty much. I think that'd be a good spot to. You want to read that little quote that you had written down? Kind of leads into that.
I don't have it written down, but I have it at my fingertips. I just want to, before we get into that, as he's said in other points of the book, he's very much he's not anti-television, but he's saying that television and like literary endeavors or a literary culture are in opposition to each other. So he dismisses the idea, which is that rear view thinking thing, where he dismisses that television in fact could extend or actually augment the intellectual traditions of like the printing press. And he's pretty definitive that television does not extend literary culture, but rather attacks it directly. So now this quote will be sort of about why he thinks that is. This is on page 87, kind of in the middle of the page. I'm just going to read the last sentence, talking about entertainment and television being entertaining, because he says just that it's merely entertaining is banal. So he says, the problem is not that television presents us with entertaining subject matter, but that all subject matter is presented as entertaining, which is another issue altogether. What that's pointing to is a word that I've been using in our off mic conversations, is like the entertainmification or the commodification and entertainmization of all things that pertain to news, that pertain to, as we'll see, it might pertain to science and medicine, it might pertain to justice, it might pertain to education. It pervades through the world in a way that he's saying television, by its very nature must be entertaining. And so the things that are on television, which in the past might not have been a focus on entertaining, have to be. One thing he doesn't talk about, only a little bit in regards to like advertising, is the capitalist idea of this. So if someone is to make money on television at a studio or at a thing, there are certain things that favors, that is more profitable than other things. And part of that is that entertainment, or the entertainmentification of everything on television, by and large, is much more profitable.
Absolutely. Do you think what I was kind of thinking when I was reading this chapter is whether or not this whole idea of entertainification, wow, that's hard to say. if we could have, well, I'm sure it's not, but if we could have hit this same point without the medium of television, starting to commodify things in an entertaining way without television.
Okay. Yeah,
I feel like we still could have hit that point, because it just kind of,
yes.
Well, especially seeing with the direction that advertising is going to do. If we're talking about advertising, not like commercials or like through the visual medium, but if you're just listening to commercials like on the radio, it's not necessarily going to be focused on the content of what they're saying. It's still seeing a trend towards evoking your emotions, and that's how they're kind of now attacking your psyche.
Yeah. I think it's in this chapter that he talks about, because part of this, the evolution from like a literary culture to the television culture, the culture of show business, and the entertainmentification of it, he does point to the telegraphy and photography as being audio and visual and faster sort of means of disseminating information, and that's like the logical, television is the logical next step there. And so he's pointing to it because he does talk about how at the age of the printing press, it could have been used to reproduce, is that in this chapter? Used to reproduce images. So the church could have used it to produce images that evoke certain things that are aligned with their worldview and further their cause.
Mm-hmm.
But what they found was having the printing press printing the Bible, whatever version it was King James or this or that, actually led to sort of splitting off denominations that aren't interested. If you're talking about Catholicism and the Roman Catholic Church, they now have the teachings of Jesus or the Word of God or the Bible, the doctrine, at their fingertips, where they don't need the papacy to be the, only source of that thing. They can just have it at their thing. So that led to a divergent there in several different denominations. So there is a world where the image via the printing press or the entertainment via the printing press you could see how that could get to a point where what you're asking is if we wouldn't have got here without the TV. And I think it's possible. It didn't happen that way. I mean, in the hundreds of years between the printing press into telegraphy and photography and television. So it didn't happen totally or completely. I'm sure there was attempts. Could it have happened? I think it potentially could have, but because of what the printing press did and what its initially was for, it seems like that probably would have continued, but it's hard to say because without photography or telegraphy or television, the world would be profoundly different.
Yeah.
And so I don't know where we would have gotten there or when that would have evolved into, what we're at today.
Certainly hard to speculate. I'm almost thinking that I have no idea. Could that have been the next logical step as well?
Well, it could be, but then what you're saying is that we were inevitably going to get here in regards to public discourse or in regards to anything, just no matter what, without telegraphy, photography, television. We were just, the human nature was just going to push to where we are, just axiomatically, which I don't know if I agree with, but
well,
there's
maybe given the structures and institutions that we have in place, because I think it's just quite easy to manipulate the mind to sell whatever it is that you're selling, that there's not as much room for honest and serious discourse.
Yeah, but what if it's all interlinked, and what if the printing press continued, but what that led, and the primacy or supremacy of the printing press continued in informing our culture into a literary culture for hundreds of years, there would be attempts to that, but maybe having a highly literary focused culture is anathema to the dumbing down of certain things, where it wouldn't be automatic. So like, because we still would have been so much like, that would have been the medium, that would have been the way of people obtaining and disseminating information in such a way that they would have been better suited to combat, maybe the working on the mind or the feeling or the heart. They would have been better to combat that and better easily spot it.
That's staunchly optimistic sounding to me.
I just lost you. About sort of, we were talking about whether or not it was inevitable that we ended up here, whether it could have happened with literature or the printing press, or whether it is only because of telegraphy, photography, television, and so forth. And I think you had something to say about that, but you might not remember what it was.
It's gone with the wind, unfortunately.
Well, do you want to go through some of the examples that he talks about?
All right, well, let's get into the main one at least, because the ABC Network 80-minute discussion thing.
Yes, the day after, talking about nuclearization.
Yeah, because the way he prefaced it, I guess I wasn't totally prepared for what he was trying to argue with this example, because he's like, this is the most like serious case that we saw on television, and then he goes, because the serious nature of the content, which was about the nuclear holocaust, it was fiercely critiqued by like intellectual, influential bodily politics or something like that, he said.
Body politic, yeah. And it was people that were serious, serious people.
Yeah, it was seriously, like,
when they talk about serious things.
He mentioned like Carl Sagan and whoever.
Henry Kissinger.
Yeah. And then he also mentioned that there was no commercials and there was no music at the time as well. So I was like, okay, we'll see how this plays out. And
this is the one thing, when I read it, like before I had continued, I was like, oh, maybe I should go watch this. But then after I read what he says about it, I was like, okay, no, I could probably skip that.
Yeah. Right? I thought it was going to be like an actual example of the medium being used effectively.
Too. Yeah, me too. But alas, what were the issues?
Well, as I read through it, I did kind of want to attribute the time constraint having a large factor on it, but he did acknowledge that that wasn't really a leading factor for it. And then I guess, yeah, like we said, he tries to get into the inherent properties of television as a medium, and to why this discussion was not fruitful.
My question after reading it, because he sort of talks about like the structure of the discussion, and it wasn't quite a debate. There was very little reference to what other speakers had said. They all kind of just came up, did their piece, and moved on, which points to the sort of now thisification of the people way. Where
and it certainly doesn't have to be that way, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. Is there is a way to have something that Neil Postman would like on television,
but that's just not playing to the medium's strengths, as you would
It's not
say.
playing to the medium strengths. Interestingly enough, in some ways, the internet and in some parts social media has allowed for those things to happen. They're maybe not as pervasive, but there is an avenue for people to search, I guess, YouTube or wherever, and find something that does offer them reflection, does have serious people talking seriously about serious topics, where if you look for it, it's there
Yeah,
and
sure.
you can get there. But on TV, maybe it was a little harder at the time. And even now, if I try to think of modern examples of something like that, I don't know if there are any on like the mainstream TV. If you look at maybe independent broadcasting, if you look at, there are certain things that can happen on, but in some ways, as much as the internet has done bad for public discourse as regards to amusing ourselves to death, it has done some good in allowing for, if you like Jordan Peterson and you think he's a serious guy and he can debate Sam Harrison, you like him and he's a serious guy, you can see that. Or if you want to watch Chomsky or Foucault, or if you want to watch, even just those people being interviewed, not even debating, or Jordan Peterson and Zizek or whoever, there is the ability to now see those things having not been there in person, which
Mm-hmm.
does have some basis in a literary culture and a literary background for those specific things, if you think those are serious people that you take seriously.
So, is there some qualities there that make being able to see it better than just hearing it?
What do you mean?
If I could just, well, like watching their debate versus just hearing their debate on the radio.
It depends. So for some of those, no, and for some, yes. I think to the I watched this a while ago. There was a debate between Bill Nye the Science Guy and this fucking guy. It's Ken something. It's not Ken Starr, it's not Ken Burns, I don't remember what it is, but he's like the founder of like the Creationist Museum. So they had a debate about evolution, but both of them brought like slides and prepared visuals to sort of talk about as their point. So then it's like you want to see the visuals. You could have still gotten a lot from it without it, but if you are watching Foucault and Chomsky talk about stuff, you might not need a visual for that, unless you buy into like if you're interested in the importance of body language and dialect and sort of how they maneuver themselves versus how they're speaking, but that might be entertainmification. Like those might actually not be, body language might not be a meaningful thing if you're trying to just sort of decipher what they're actually talking about.
It could maybe be manipulative.
Sure.
Especially just what they look like, what their physical appearance.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I guess I was just thinking out loud right there. I could see it going both ways.
Yeah, I wonder, do you have any examples of like TV where they allow for something like this? I mean, I have one that is just sort of related. It's not like a long form debate or something, but it's like one of the times in recent history where news anchors were doing something that postmen didn't see them do, which is 9/11. If you watch the footage from, especially after the first plane hit, but before the second plane hit and before the towers fell, if you watched live news reporting footage, television news, and those news anchors that are just talking heads or talking hairdos, as he might say, who are the good looking sort of not necessarily journalistic journalists who are entertaining us with the daily news and the now this of everything. There was moments there where there was honest, good journalism that wasn't entertaining. It wasn't cutting commercials. It wasn't for profit. And you see very genuine and authentic coverings of people witnessing what's happening, especially when the second plane hits, acknowledging it, remembering they have a job to do. They can't freak out. They have to be, and Postman might have a problem with this because they always have to have a certain demeanor. But that was a moment where there was some, not, it wasn't the cheerfulness. It was very, very serious and authentic and important and well done. I mean, there's people on the ground too for television news that were talking to people, which was kind of good, but even that's a little iffy. But people in the studio at the desk actually had some real powerful moments of good television news at that time. So that's like a one for me, but that's not a long form discussion or like a fruitful debate. It's just an element of news where it is separate from what I would say the age of show business is. It was actually in that moment separate from show business as news or news as show business, and marked a moment for that to be the exact last time that happens.
Why? So you think that's maybe the last time that happened? Is there?
Yeah.
And I guess that'd be associated with this immense national tragedy, I guess, that occurred. I mean, I'm sure that there's been other tragedies that have occurred on the international scale, but we still don't get that sense of, no. I don't know, something with that. It's just like so in the moment to not really be worrying about the showmanship aspect.
There's a recency bias to it, a recency advantage to it, to having live footage of the towers that the audience is watching and the newscasters are watching, and then them reacting to that. So there's something there. But the reason I think it's the last, because even if we go to modern times of live and current as a situation is happening, if it's a mass shooting or anything else, it still has elements of show business in it. It doesn't have the sort of I can't think of the right word, but there's a calm, collected kind of reverence for what's happening. And I don't see a reverence for people covering Sandy Hook or Las Vegas or Orlando nightclub or anything like that. It doesn't have that. Even if they're ongoing, it has sort of, they still tend to not cut to commercials if there's an active shooting going on, but the coverage of it, even on the ground and in the studio, doesn't have, again, I'll use reverence to the situation that we had on 9/11.
Do you think that level of reverence would be achievable again if there was another sort of event to occur that was, it's very similar to 9/11?
I don't know.
Whether it was just a terrorist attack or whatever, those qualities were that made it.
I'm not sure that we would.
That's interesting to think about.
That we would. Because that's why I think that was like sort of the last instance of that. Not because there wasn't benefits to that, or harms from it, but I think people learned from that in a way where the people that make money off of this stuff learned from it in a way that they wanted to be able to cover those things without sort of any of the hardships of those things. They still wanted to earn money and still wanted to do their thing. So I just don't think we have that. Plus we have a generation of people who are going to be broadcasters or newscasters or whatever the people are, that has grown up in the wake of that has been sort of separated from what that was. Now, I'm not familiar with newscasters of the 80s as Neil Postman is, but I'm familiar with the quote unquote newscasters of like modern times. And I can see today in Maddow or Tucker Carlson or whoever, where these things that Postman is pointing to are just still so evident. But at that time, what's interesting is I haven't looked into this. Postman was alive during 9/11. And I wonder if he's ever written or said anything about that coverage, because he died in, I believe, 2003. So there is something there. I mean, the issue also is if in the wake of 9/11, you return to the mainstream news media as another arm of the government that's feeding lies to drum up support for a foreign war based on nothing. And the news just flipped back from that reverence and honesty and authenticity to just a kind of um, separate, unattached kind of supposed to be objectivity, but it really isn't, that kind of, furthered itself as an arm of propaganda for the state, but also made an immense amount of money and influenced a lot of policy and public um conversation. So that's a little bit of a tangent. But that's like, it's not an example of a good discourse being televised, which I think there is, as we discussed, there is a way for that to be done in video.
Yeah,
Maybe
sure.
on a television or on the internet or whatever. There's a way for that to be done.
He did outright state here, it was, I wrote it down, it was on page 91, but he says, I do not mean to categorically say that it is impossible to use television as a carrier of coherent language or thought and process, which I'm glad he outright just said that, because he's pretty scathing so far in terms of how he's critiquing television.
Right. I mean, because like on one level, if someone were to think that what we're doing here is an opportunity for like a fruitful discussion about meaningful things that are serious, is it benefited from being video or audio, or is would it have better been put in print? And I mean, there's an argument for either, I suppose, but yeah, I'm not sure. The day after thing, I was interested in it, and then I wasn't. But maybe it's still like as an example of like the failures of the medium in its attempt to sort of surpass and overcome its shortcomings. Maybe that's an interesting example.
So I did have one quote here I wanted to read to you. We may have already kind of answered this a little bit, but you could tell me whether or not you disagree with this. Page 92. Okay. The single most important fact about television is that people watch it, which is why it's called television. What they watch and like to watch are moving pictures, millions of them, of short duration and dynamic variety. It is in the nature of the medium that it must suppress the content of ideas in order to accommodate the requirements of visual interest. How do you feel about that?
That is to say, to accommodate the values of show business.
Yeah.
Okay. So I agree insofar as it's, and he doesn't explicitly always point to this, but I probably will point to it more. If we're talking about making money, then what works on TV as short images and moving pictures with, small duration and dynamic variety, that it suppresses what he says the content of ideas in order to accommodate just moving image. And so it doesn't, for me, inherently do that. But when we add in the show business, when we add in the business of it, then it makes sense why it does to me.
Sure. Do you think he would say the same thing, that that statement only reigns true in lieu of the structures that we have pertaining to show business?
I think, like we discussed, if we're talking about the kind of debates that I think are based in literature or literary culture or, the printing, because we have them and we do a video of them. So they're there, right? And sometimes there's more than one video, or there's a series of discussions of people that do allow for this. I think he's not only talking about moving images or television as the technology, right? He is talking about it as the medium. And even as the medium, it doesn't automatically reject those things. It's just as the medium, as a business, favors a certain thing, like we talked about in the past. What uses of the mind does it favor? What uses of the mind
What's
does
its agenda playing to its strengths?
What is its bias? What is its agenda? What makes money? And what do people want to see? Now, you and I might say a fruitful discussion between Chomsky and Foucault on video is great for us to watch and allows for a lot of reflection and a lot of questioning and a lot of conversation about that subject. But to other people where mainstream television and television or TV at large is their made operating like or ingesting media, they would not probably find that discussion as worthwhile, as entertaining, as important. They would, it might be boring, or it might be whatever else. And so that's why inherently television avoids that, because they need people to watch it, and people don't want to see that by and large. And part of the reason people don't want to see that by and large, it's a feedback loop. Like, people don't want to see what bores them, so they don't want to put stuff boring on television. So then we don't want to see stuff boring, and we don't want to question stuff. So then they don't want to put stuff up there that we question or makes us think. And it just becomes sort of a perpetual cycle moving towards the entertainmentification.
So to kind of segue a bit here into the latter half of this chapter, kind of two topics we could segue to. I think it would be important to note that I did like that he tied this back to his old argument with typography, because like we discussed, those were some of the foundational chapters which he was going to parallel in his arguments against show business here, talking about how typography kind of changed the different modes of discourse and, I don't know, the all-encompassing ranges of just in our culture. We talked about, I think I had a line here, but it was about, I don't know, I guess typography was about having almost these intellectual, serious-based discussions, and then now television is sort of inviting us to amuse each other to death, I guess.
Yeah. In relation to that, one of the things he talks about is like the kill the messenger thing, and the nature of typography, or the printed word or the written word, as being divorced from the deliverer or the person has written it, right? And television introduces then that factor of who is saying these things. So when he talks about epistemology or verisimilitude, in relation to like how you cast a news anchor, and whether people find them credible or not based on how they look, and he's seeing that as a fault, because in the typographical world you don't have that to the same extent. So I think it's important to sort of talk about that. I mean, what do you make of people you see in clips or of anything else of traditional news? And how do you, when you look at them, how much is the visual influencing your ideas of what's credible and what's not?
I think that's kind of why I was asking before about when you gave the example of Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, and then I asked, well, what about just watching the debate versus hearing it on the radio? And I was wondering what value am I getting from being able to watch a discussion versus just hear a discussion?
It, or just read it.
Yeah, and sure, you could say, it's maybe there's another level of understanding you can have when you get to see their body language, you get to see these guys talking to each other. But then another level, it's just maybe all those qualities are just muddying my perception of the content, and now I am less able to accurately articulate what they're talking about, whether it be the body language they're using, maybe what they look like physically, how animated they are, all the different little techniques you can use to be more engaging, more entertaining in just something that is just discourse, just a discussion. So I guess I don't really know. I would imagine, I think there's pretty good science to show that people are pretty deeply influenced by what other people look like in judging their qualities. I think there's you might be familiar with the experiment they did with I wish I could remember what year it was, but they were auditioning professional musicians, and then they did it Eventually they
behind
started,
like a
yep, they started doing that
black
behind
box.
behind curtains and stuff like that, so you couldn't
Yeah,
see
yeah.
who was doing it. And I think at the time it was believed that males were superior to females in playing
Yep.
instruments. And then when it was revealed that females could play equally as good, if not better, I think the judges were very
Yeah.
angry about it and in complete disbelief.
Well, and that's with anything. I mean, part of that, the visualization of things is incredibly influential, and maybe to a fault, where someone might, you have this in musician, as you describe in that study, where they just, men were better at playing the violin, but then when they couldn't see who it was, it was different. When you blind taste test wine, even as like sommelier, sometimes if you know the price of the bottle and the age of the bottle, that'll influence how it affects your taste and how you interpret it. But if you don't know, sometimes the cheapest bottle that's not aged well is better to you than, the other one. And so there is this kind of, it's almost like in some ways like a placebo effect of like having someone tell you you're taking a drug that'll work, and it's not, it's sugar pills, and it has a positive effect on you, where it's like just having either the visual or having some information, even if it's not true, is just automatically going to influence how you think about it. And part of that's playing on your heart, playing on your emotions, playing on your passions, playing on anything else. But if you really strip things away from that, then all of a sudden you're faced with a different conundrum. You're faced with really trying to decipher, what's right and what feels credible and what's wrong and which argument holds weight for you. If, for example, you had the debates between Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson in written form, and even if you didn't know, especially if you didn't know their histories or who they were or what the things they're involved with, and they just put those out there, you're going to think about those in different ways than having
Absolutely.
seen them, watch them. So there is almost something that's like, and I don't know if it's detrimental, I don't know if it's bad, but we have to acknowledge the influence that it has and
Yeah.
the differences that it has when we're talking about something like discourse like this. Because there's so many things, like the music thing or wine or listening to there's audiophiles who listen to really, really high quality headphones or speakers, or they listen to just like dog shit. But if they don't know which one's which, sometimes they get confused by it, and they're a little bit, there's a difference there in having that. And maybe the visual of things is actually harmful, but I don't want to go down that road. But maybe that makes the information or the thing itself all of a sudden dependent on the visual instead of being dependent on the thing itself.
Yeah. It's quite difficult thing to answer. You think, having explored this issue, but you could take a position on that?
No, not really. It's tough. Can you?
I think I would. I have a leaning. I think I'm maybe leading. If this is part of the argument of what Postman's trying to lay out here, I guess I would be a little bit more compelled to lean in that direction. That the visualization is inherently manipulative.
Yeah, I like what you said about how it muddies the thing itself, because it becomes more than the thing itself. It's not just about what's said or what's written or what's talked about or what the information is. It's now,
well, yeah, it's about the
how
content
is it presented
and the ideas, and then you put in all of these other presentation tactics into it. It's hard to see where the value comes from in that the visual appeal. I don't know if there is any.
There could be. I mean, there could be benefits to having visuals.
Well, sure, but it just at least in the examples we've given right here so far.
Yeah, once they're intertwined with the thing itself, and people understand it as components of a singular thing, where the person who's saying something is intrinsically connected to the things they're saying, then all changes sort of the meaning of what they're saying. You're not getting just that. You're getting this person is saying something, not, this is what's being said.
Yeah, there's just so much more involved in your own personal level of perception, I think, once you get that visual component. I don't know. Have you ever like watched or listened to a podcast and you had like no idea what this guy looked like, and then later you like continued watching it or something and you were like, oh.
Yes. I've definitely been surprised listening to like audio or even reading something, and then you see what they look like and you're like, huh, that's not where I linked their voice to.
Yeah.
When I heard their voice, it sounded like a totally different body type, or it sounded like maybe they were a different skin color, or maybe they were a different gender, or, like when I heard them, or maybe they were a different, sexual orientation or anything. But then when you see them and learn about them, it changes things. But I don't know if that then changes how I respond to, once I see them, having not seen them at first, going forward, I don't know if that influences it as much.
I have no idea.
Because like I've seen people where it would maybe two hosts on a show, and I thought, like, maybe if I had a vague image of them, I thought their voices were connected to the opposite one. And then I was really shocked to be like, oh wait, that's that one and that's that one. Wait, okay. But then yet when I continue to just listen to it, now I know who's who based on their voice and whatever, and their mannerisms and their perspectives and their knowledge. And I just kind of, it's what they look like kind of is now connected, but it still fades into the background. It's still super irrelevant. I mean, we're hot guys with hot mics, and it's like, I think if people just listen to us, they'd be like, these guys are ugly.
Okay, I guess that could be a good segue to the last, at least a topic I had in mind at the end of this chapter here. We kind of prefaced it a little bit before we started recording, but I wanted to talk about, I guess, maybe the potential upsides that there is to maybe linking the intake of information and learning and intertwining it with entertainment. And he doesn't acknowledge any benefits. I don't know if he's saying there isn't, but he doesn't bring up any at all.
Yeah.
I don't know if that will ever be addressed in the preceding chapters. I don't think so.
Just before we get to the education and entertainment,
we are at 45 minutes, by the way.
Yeah, the rest of the chapter, he talks about that the day after, which is supposed to be a serious discussion about a serious issue, is nuclear holocaust, with people who are supposed to kind of know about that sort of thing and have ideas about it. And it failed in large parts. He also talks about like the first time a court case was televised, the first time surgery was recorded and televised and narrated, the first time, or the advent of sort of religious service being televised, preachers using rock music to sort of further their cause and their faith-based ambitions. And he's outlining these all with specific examples in the book. We're not going to necessarily talk about them, but he gives these specific dates and times and things that people involved where now it's televised. And what he's trying to say there is that making it televised corrupts the thing itself in a way because it has to be entertaining. And all of a sudden, and he draws the comparison between people who are more interested in watching a certain court case that's real than they would be watching a courtroom drama or a soap opera or something else. They were, and it's not necessarily what they're more interested in or what they're, it's kind of a weird thing because court cases are boring, but people are interested in it because of the content, but then they have to be made sort of entertaining for the television. But it's sort of
because it needs to make money, though.
It needs to make money, and it's also that peekaboo world of like, now, like, here's this thing, without talking about like what it means or what it's connected to, which I have a harder time understanding the problem with televising surgical procedures and having them narrating and describing what is happening on the surgical table, because that doesn't sound entertaining to me, and I don't know if it was at the time. I don't think it was like a money thing, but it sounds like an educational thing, which sounds like it's a kind of an interesting way to deliver information for people who are looking for that information and getting to be able to see firsthand what it is while someone who knows about it talks about it. Which then brings us to the Sesame Street thing and what you're talking about, the problem that he's posting with education and entertainment.
Well, hold on. I was kind of thinking now with the institutions that we have, the structures that we have around television, we keep bringing up, well, it's because it's the age of show business. You need to make money. So I don't know, if you could just be like one single guy and you just had a video camera and you were just in there recording the surgery, and that was pretty much it. You didn't have this massive level of production. You could cut all these costs, and then you could afford to, not entertain so much as you would need to.
But that's the benefit of the internet on some levels. As much as I think
podcasts
and the internet and social media, is that there is a way with minimal barrier of entry and having the same reach as television had in 1985 when the book was written, because television was just going into every home all the time at a moment's notice if it was playing there, if it was broadcasted there. And now it's anytime, at any moment, once it's put up on the internet. And so if you wanted to watch surgery, just a guy filming surgery and talking about what's being done, that is actually not a bad way to receive information.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be entertaining. In fact, in many ways, it's not supposed to be when it's done that way. But when it's done on television, on broadcast network, what he's saying is it has to. So there's a demarcation between television as show business, or like and television itself as a medium, versus filming something.
Kind of back to the technology versus the medium, I guess. Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Gotcha.
Filming something and recording something can be close to typographic in some ways.
Gotcha. Yeah, especially if we're talking about, this example of surgery. Being able to, record that and then show that is obviously beneficial, as opposed to the example we're talking about before of just two people talking to each other.
Yeah.
So.
Right. All right. Did you want to talk about the plane thing, or you just want to move on to the Sesame Street?
Oh, yeah, 10 minutes.
All right. Get into it.
Well, I kind of wish. At the vibe, we're over halfway through the book now, and the way Postman likes to write, it's a lot of times it's very straightforward, very like confrontational.
Oh yeah,
very clear in what his position is sometimes here. So I'm wondering if, I guess you've read the whole book, but is he ever going to give any potential like pros to this age of show business at all, or the medium of television?
Not unlike he already has in the ways we discussed. Like in the earlier chapters, they're talking about like entertainment as something has benefits, if it's Charles Dickens or if it's fiction writing or if it's fiction. Like there are benefits there that I think he acknowledges earlier. And he's also not saying that it's impossible for something good to happen on television.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think he ever concedes or like goes back and saying like, in a meaningful way that would make you more comfortable with his argument. I think he is in his style of writing almost dismissive of certain things.
Yeah.
But it's like, for me, it's like pleasurably dismissive. Because
yeah. I'm sure he's very self-aware of it. So it's not like at fault of his. So
no,
it was a conscious decision. Okay, so one of the examples he gave was, I mean, the one I had written down here was about Sesame Street, the entertainification using something like basic as learning the alphabet and I don't know, I guess making songs out of it. This was one way that I guess epistemology almost was changed by entertainment. But when he gives some of these examples, I mean, it's supposed to be from his perspective a critique and negative points. I mean, you also mentioned the other one where we had the professor, he would write notes on the board, and when he ran in a room, he would continue to write on the wall. And he had these other animated ways of teaching to students in just, I guess, creative ways. What was it? The glass molecule example? I don't know if he was like just being animated, bouncing around the room, just mimicking some physics, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like I said, I don't know. This part was a little bit confusing to me, and then the chapter comes to a close relatively quickly after he just like glosses over this many examples, and then he doesn't even go very deeply into it. And like I said, as I was reading it, I didn't know if this was supposed to be a negative critique or not, because I was reading them and I was thinking, oh, great, this is just a lot of creativity that he's showing here. When you add this visual element, there's a lot of creativity to be worked with, and I saw this interjecting entertainment into education and learning to be of benefit in certain ways. At least for me personally, I think when a professor or someone can be that much more engaging, can get you to listen rather than just being dry and serious all the time is, I don't know, priceless, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, but then I might point to like a fault of where we're at is in respect to our attention span, or like what we find engaging and not. Like in theory, the content itself is engaging enough that the delivery doesn't matter necessarily, but that's not the case. That's not the case for us, and it's just not the case for people at large.
In theory. But, okay.
Well, right, because what he's trying to say is in typography, you know, that matters much less. Now, writing well, even if it's very fact-based, you know, and printed words, it still needs to have a cadence and a flow of ideas and words and sentence structure and syntax that makes it readable and digestible and good, even if the only draw is that you're engaged and you're interested in what the information is. I think it's important actually to sort of push back on the Sesame Street thing, because for children, holding their attention and having a song just to A, B, C, D, L, any of that shit. I almost just went A, B, C, D, L, but A, B, C, D, E, F, G, you know, having that little mnemonic device, might say, or having something to learn basic math, or having something to learn to brush your teeth or wash your hands, or like do things around the house. That's like helpful for kids. Now, the issue might be that, does that then impart on them as kids, as they grow into prepubescent, into teenagers, into adults, where they still need that?
Not a chance, dude. I wouldn't buy into that at all.
But you're saying that you like a professor that's engaging in a way that transcends the content.
Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Is that
I don't think that takes away from the content.
Right. So the issue would be then when it becomes more about engaging than it is just about the content. So you actually lose something there, which I don't think is the case.
A level of engagement is also really important to the learning experience. I mean, if we're just talking about just sitting in a room and then being lectured at for however long, we know that could be tough sometimes, as opposed to active participation from creativity. I don't know.
And it can be tough sometimes, even if you're very, very interested in what it's about. And so then, but then, is that a fault of human nature? Is that the age of show business just corrupting our psychology about this? Or is that...
I don't think so. I don't think I would take that approach. I think we've just found better ways to learn. I think we're just playing different tricks that are aiding us in our process to learn new things. That's how I see it.
Yeah. And that's very well put. I think there's a lot to be said about that. So you're probably right there. So I don't know. Yeah, that's why I would push back a little bit about what he's saying.
It is a little bit hard because, like I said, this chapter was only 13 pages or something, and then he brings in this last little topic we're talking about now in the last few pages. So I mean, I can't even go that deep into it because I don't even know if I could fully embody his position on it.
Right, because he doesn't go into it to like an insane...
I mean, we're just like kind of speculating and asking questions here. So
there was some funny stuff at the end about how they were going to make the new media Bible consist of 225 hours of film, and then he said, based on the producers past having produced Saturday Night Fever in Greece, there's some concern that God might be played by John Travolta, which I had a good laugh at. And we're getting to sort of the end of, and he talks about people who are getting honorary degrees from accredited colleges who are just, they're entertainers, they're actors, they're comedians, or whatever, and he seems to have some issues with that. And then he talks about the 1984 election, where he says the two candidates confronted each other on television in what were called debates, but they're not in the least like what we discussed as the debates between Douglas and Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
And so then to end here, is there anything else you want to point to that will lead us into the next chapter? I mean, I think there's a quotes in the last paragraph that I would read.
Go for it, man. You did already read ahead to the next chapter, so I'm sure you can pick something good out of here.
Well, I'm just going to read like the last paragraph.
Go for it.
Not all of it, but so what all of this means, all of these examples of, and I'm diverging from this is a little editorialization, but what all this means, what all it means about televising courtrooms and surgery rooms and entertainment kind, making education entertainment and making presidential debates entertainment and making all these things entertainment. So what all that means is that our culture has moved toward a new way of conducting its business, especially its important business. The nature of its discourse is changing as the demarcation line between what is show business and what is not becomes harder to see with each passing day. Our priests and our presidents, our surgeons and our lawyers, our educators and our newscasters need worry less about satisfying the demands of their discipline than the demands of good showmanship. And I think, as we've discussed, that's not 100% true in the medium of like recording things and like recording visual and auditory presentations of things. And so when we're doing this, we're not especially concerned with how we look or the way in which we speak. We're more concerned with just what we're talking about, right? So the internet in that way has helped, but only because this will not be televised. No one would want to televise this, and no one would pay for it to be televised or advertise on it. Now, the hope would be that with podcasts or with the internet or with other mediums and media, there are advertisers that are interested in putting something there. And there are ways for people to make money where, unfortunately, though, then it does push those people towards being more entertaining than it does pushing them towards being like better at their discipline. And so in that way, this chapter in our discussion really puts a rift for me, because for so long I'm just completely dismissive of the age of show business and drawing it to social media and what that has done to discourse. And then on the flip side, the internet and maybe social media, although I'm hesitant to say that, but the internet itself has also done good things to discourse, but it's just what is happening more? Like, what's the magnitude and what's the potential? I mean, the potential for the internet to do a great deal good for the discourse in the way that you and I and Postman might say is good is infinite. But what's actually happening en masse is not that. And now this, a word from our sponsor, which that's the next chapter is now this, which I think draws connections to the Peekaboo World, chapter 5. And I look forward to discussing it because I think that'll be a really good one.
Okay, until next time.
Yeah, closing thoughts. Anything about Age of Show Business?
No, man. I think you had a good tangent at the end. Your little closing statement, little paragraph you read was pretty good.
Yeah.
Pretty important to what he was talking about in this chapter.
I just, the thing with the fucking plane and the games, and then being like, so they maybe had turbulence, but people had the games, and then they were like, I guess it's fun to fly from Vancouver to Chicago or whatever. I was like, well, what the fuck is he talking about?
I didn't know why that was in there, but I thought it was. I laughed when I read it.
Yeah, I guess. I guess, man. Whatever.
He was trying to amuse us.
Yeah, that was strange. I had a good chuckle with the John Travolta thing because even back then we were like a little suspect to John Tra. All right. Well,
okay.
If you're listening, thank you for listening. Go read the book. Listen to our earlier episodes. Continue listening.
Maybe read the book a second time.
And fucking maybe read the book. Maybe
just
never read any other book. Only this book forever.
Buy it for your friends. Buy it for your parents. Just distribute it how you can.
Get it out there.
All right.